Hello and welcome everyone to the second art lesson for my art lesson streams. Again, we're covering simple basics of how to draw before we get into something more complicated and things more elaborate. But before we begin and everything all together, I'm going to refer you guys to also check out my YouTube account, which I'll be linking below. That's where I'll actually be posting all of the videos public, if not my Patreon, which will also be linked down below, to basically get the files, find the programs, and contact me in every which way or form. I'll also be linking my Twitter, just in case. You can contact me there for ease of access. Now, beginning with Lesson 2, we're going to actually be covering 4 very basic steps, but before we start anything, we're actually going to be starting up by covering last time's lesson slightly, essentially going over again what gestures are and all together. I won't go over the other subjects that we covered last time, such as ideology, acceptance, and the different tools you can use, but in this one around, we're just going over what gestures are in case you just want to go in and start straight with a drawing. So, most people who probably either have never taken an art course before or even know what drawing is, honestly, it all depends on what you're going with. Most people think gestures are what people do with their faces, such as face gestures and the like, and they're right, but in truth, drawing gestures is just basically you going in and just doodling really quickly to get the motion of your wrist going, to kind of get the flow of your hand and everything all together back up to speed. Now, some people think it's like, oh, I'm going to draw a gesture, so I'm going to draw something really time-consuming, really detailed, and all of this, and going really slow. No. If you're going for a gesture, you're going to do something really quick, and something just to basically get the wrist moving and all together going. So you're going to start basically drawing things really quickly. And pretty much it doesn't always have to be perfect, it just has to basically convey the shape that you want it to, and all together. And per these actual gestures, it doesn't always have to take very quickly. Sometimes you can actually do a longer gesture, which essentially is going to give you a more time-consuming thing, so you can actually add some extra detail and the like. And it doesn't always have to be the full body. Now, with all of that said, the main thing with the gestures that you have to keep in mind is that they're just warm-ups. Last time around, I actually mentioned that you can actually do gestures in different time intervals, and that's actually an ideal way of doing it. You can either do them in 5-second interval, 10-second intervals. I've seen some people go up to 3 seconds, some even go up to 30 seconds. Now, the main thing with them is just, again, to warm up, get your hand moving, basically flex the wrist, and all that other such. Pretty much just get your artistical flow going. You don't have to take too much time on them. You can make them as big as you want, or as tiny as humanly possible. The main thing is just getting the flow of the hand going. And as you see, messy is perfectly acceptable. Now, with that little touch-up done, we can move on to the main things of today's lesson. Today we're going to be covering a very simple concept. We're going to be covering the concepts of geometric shapes. Now, you might be asking why geometric shapes are so important. Well, in truth, geometric shapes are, for one, a very good way of practicing art, and two, the essential building blocks of most drawings and illustrations. So, that aside, with the basic concepts of geometric shapes, which we will be covering over what I meant by the concept of different building blocks and all that such in a little bit, but first, let's cover them individually. So, the main thing at first with the geometric shapes is you have your standard shapes, such as the circle, the square, rectangle, triangle, oval, those type of shapes. And you'd think, oh, that's very simple, very all together, and all that such, but in truth, with these shapes here, you can actually start learning how to do shading, you can start learning how to do values, you can even start working in perspective. There's a lot of different things you can do that basically get your style flowing and all together, essentially moving and the like. So, why did I say you can essentially use things for values and shadings? Well, here's where we go. Let's take, for example, our good friend here, the circle. I'm gonna draw me a new one. Now let's say, for example, I want to practice shading with a geometric shape. Just basically picking which side the light source is coming from, and I can essentially start practicing saying it's like, okay, the shade's coming from over here, so darken up the shade here, and then let the shade travel this way. This is a basic practice you can do with shapes. And in truth, this practice is actually something that most artists do for an extended period of time. And what's more is that with these extended practices, you can actually get better with the concept of shading, with the concept of construction, and even the concept of actually building things from scratch without having to work with a reference. Now, that being said, references are very important, and above all else, they're also excruciatingly essential. Don't ever have anyone tell you that working from a reference is cheating, because in truth, there is no right or wrong way. A reference material piece is just something that'll allow you to basically refer back to and get ideas from. It's not meant as a tool for you to basically copy directly from, it's just basically something that you're using to either assist you in the construction that you're working on, or to at least allow you to gain ideas from it. So don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Now, see here the value of shading and all that other such, but with that same type of construction, let's say we're going to be using the square real quick. Okay, now let's say we're going to make that square into a 3D piece. Also, hello Daisy! But let's say you're going to be basically making this into a square piece. Extend it outward a little bit, and then just draw it in like this. And right there we essentially have a 3D square. Another way of doing this is essentially just an easier method. Draw the same square. Now draw another square right behind it. And simply connect the lines. And then once you're done connecting the lines, erase the excess. And now we have, once again, another 3D square, also called a cube. And if we're going for Portal references here, we have a little companion cube. Similar thing with a triangle, really. Let's say we're going to combine shapes on this one. Let's say we're going to start here with a small little oval, but now we want the triangle, right? Now we actually have a cone. We still have the triangular shape, but now we also have an oval. And this is the basic thing about the shapes. You can actually mix and match the shapes to basically build things into more of a grander perspective. So taking that circle, and let's say we're going to make that circle with a cone. So we're going to put the circle, and we're going to put a smaller circle here, and then we're going to add a cone. Erase the little line intersecting here. Go up a little here. So right there, you essentially have a little small thing. Add a little bit of shading here. I'm going to actually add it as hash marks. And you have here a very, very basic concept. If you wanted to, you can even go as far as to add 2 more cylinders, or rather ovals. Another oval in there, only this time you shade it all in. And you have started having a face. Throw in a small little line. And you have yourself a very, very smiling little semi-bald clown with no ears. So let's give him some ears, shall we? Essentially, just draw in the little oval again. Add a squiggly line. Erase the intersecting point. And now you have the first ear. Do the same to the other side. And there you have it. Now this is the important thing about shapes. Everything you view in life is a shape. And this is where we're going to be moving on to a very interesting topic when it comes down to art, and that's observation. Now, a lot of people say that observation is just the merit of looking at someone do something and then learning from it. And yes, that is true. You are observing the person's method, you are observing the same process, much like you are all observing my lesson here. But the main thing with all of these is the fact that observation goes a little bit beyond that concept. Now, here's where the basic things come in. When you're observing an object, instead of observing it for what it is, always try to break it down into something basic. Now let's say, for example, taking that same concept into mind, let's say you're looking at a tree. So, tree, usually really bushy, a lot of twigs, all that other such, right? But let's say you can break that tree down into basic shapes. So you would have the bushes essentially being nothing but ovals. The main tree like a lightly larger oval, and more ovals going down like this, correct? And then the tree trunk itself is just another giant cone, rectangle, whatever you want to call it. Cone right here for the actual trunk, or triangle. And then you have lines coming to it for multiple angles. Now, here's the main thing with it, is the fact that with actual things, you can also, like with the actual shapes, you can actually view other things in many very different ways. Let's look at, for example, actually let's get something a little bit more difficult, shall we? Let's look at the human body. Specifically, let's look at a human arm. So let's say human arm is essentially stretched up, almost as if it was trying to hold something to someone's face. That usually means the arm is basically going to be curved, so people would look at it and be like, okay, that's one rectangle, 2 rectangles, hand being an oval here, and let's put the shoulder as a circle with the elbow as a circle as well. Going further into something that Speedy here just also mentioned, the concept of hands. You can actually break down the hand to multiple things. You can either break it down into a circle with multiple actual elongated rectangles, if the hand is actually stretched out as such like this. You can actually even break it down to something a little bit more cubic-like, saying the hand is actually a square, and then everything here, let's say the hand's actually got slight bend to it, is more just smaller boxes, which you could then edit and extrude to your discretion. Everything comes down to basic shapes. So, even your feet actually fall into the same discretion, really. You have your little ankle here as your circle. A triangle extruding outward. Small little box here for your actual heel. And another rectangle here for the base of your foot. Looking at it from another view, again, let's start with your ankle. Triangle. And rectangle. And even when looking at the calf muscles and everything in the body, everything breaks down into shapes. You look at the human head, and it's only mainly just an oval. Neck, just a small little rectangle. The chest can actually be either a circle with a small rectangle right there, added to there, with circles and rectangles for the hands and arms. Another little box for your waistline, with more rectangles and circles coming down until you hit your foot. Everything in the world can essentially be broken down into basic geometric shapes. And these geometric shapes will actually help you to build things more, to be able to construct things a lot easier. But the first thing you need to learn how to do is how to view things and break them down slowly. Now, there is a concept that goes beyond the observation of just basic shapes and everything, and that's essentially how to bring all of this together. You see, you can view how the basic shapes of a certain object are. You can view that a soda can is nothing more than a cylinder. You can view that a wallet is at times nothing more than a rather minorly extruded 3D square or rectangle. But there's more to it than just that. Let's say, for example, you're going to be looking at a scene. Small little scenery. Nothing too bad. Let's say all it is just a hill with a tree and a small house. So, let's start first. Let's start with your little horizon line. This line here usually represents the line your eye sees the most. So right here, this is where your eyes are always going to be focused. Now let's say there's like small mountains in the back, so you're just going to draw little squiggles like this to represent the mountains. There's a tree right over here, so you just draw little ovals that represent the tree. And the little house is right here. Now let's say this house is essentially a little bit larger than this because it goes a lot farther back. Now, same thing as before. You take the square, drawing it back, connecting the lines, and let's say it has a small roof here, so you do the following thing here as well, and just take it all back. Erase any excess lines that you might come across, and essentially you've started setting up the base idea of what you're seeing. This will be the bare bones basic of everything. And this is just, again, breaking down a very, very simple concept. Let's break down a slightly less simple concept now, shall we? Let's say we're going to be breaking down the concept of a bird perching on an actual tree limb. So, let's say we're going to break down a bird on a tree limb. Now, usually most people would start thinking, okay, how can I actually draw a shape for the tree limb and all such? And with this, you basically only start with a line and then slowly increase that line outward. So let's just say the tree limb is this. And let's say, okay, you want the tree limb to be a little bit more complicated, so you would draw little ovals that would represent where the leaves are, and that such, and let's just add a little bit of thickness to the tree limb. So now from there, we're going to need to add the bird. So, what is a bird? Well, circle for the head, little triangle for the beak, largest circle here for the actual body, rectangle for where the tail is, oval on the wing, and then we add the line going down for the legs. From there, you can essentially start to kind of just bring things together by combining them, joining them together, and then you can essentially start refining and cleaning the image up. Which, this brings me to my next part of this lesson, and honestly, the last part of this lesson for today. You see, essentially picking up the basic shapes of an object is ideal, because it helps you essentially build the concept, essentially develop it more, and be able to actually view things in a very simplistic manner. But once the simplicity of it all has been established, then you can begin refining the subject. Now, there are multiple ways to refine a piece. It could actually take sometimes anywhere between maybe 3, sometimes even more. I've seen people go as far as to give 10 steps into the refining process. And what refining basically means is just fleshing out all of the details so that your image starts basically coming together. Now, for this example, I will actually be using our little bird here. So I'm going to go ahead and erase our little cottage in the mountains. And let's bring this bird center stage. Now, usually when you're in this stage, if you're doing pen and paper, if you're just drawing as a basic gesture, it's alright to have a piece be excruciatingly dark, really messy, not so much. But if what you're trying to do is start with a very, very clean image, you would usually start this really, really light. If I were to draw this image again and present it in such a manner, I would essentially start extremely light, add like the head there, with a little beak here, then go in, add the rest of the body, the wing, tail there, with the leg, of course, add my little tree stump, or twig, with the leaves going around. Again, I would draw things very, very lightly so that I could then erase if need be and not mess things up so much. So, from this, you could then start a concept known as sketching. Now, sketching is usually a really quick, sometimes a little bit more detailed, at other times excruciatingly detailed, method of essentially starting to add detail to your image. So let's say I'm going to start sketching on this bird right here. So I already know that the bird's neck is like this, with the bird right here, the beak, eye is going to be roughly around here. And don't worry about me not showing you exactly where the different proportions of the eye are and the eyes are and everything. That will actually probably be for the next lesson, where I'll be covering how to essentially further develop the concept of taking a geometric shape and building something new from it. But for now, I'm basically showing you the concept of sketching, where you can basically view something from real life and attempt to duplicate it with your own style. So, bird's eye will be right around here, with little things coming down. The beak right there, the bird's actually turned away from us slightly. The bird's got a little bit of thing here, and I just start adding in more and more details to the bird. So I take the little oval with the wing, extrude it outward a little bit to basically make it compensate for that. And again, sketching doesn't have to be really neat, doesn't have to be anything altogether. It can actually be as messy as you want it to be. All you have to do is just basically pretty much have fun with it and not be afraid to experiment a little bit. I'm not going back in for the twig. Adding a little bit more thickness to the twig. Adding a little bit more fine to the actual leaf. And then you can add more concepts to the bird itself. So let's say, for example, the bird actually had little head feathers like that, and you could honestly keep sketching more. Like, let's say you want to also capture the shading. So let's say the shading of the bird is right here, so it's actually rather heavily lit up by this part here at the back. So a lot of the shadows will be right here, so you can actually use hatching, cross-hatching, which, I guess in a sense, to explain this a little bit, the concept of hashing and cross-hatching is essentially creating values and lines, like values and shades using just lines. Now, if you're using just lines going in one direction like this, that's just hatching. But if you're going to increase the darkness of it, let's say you're going to make it, you made this to try and create a shadow, but that shadow's not dark enough. Normally what people would do is they would use cross-hatching, where they would essentially come in and create that. That would essentially create a darker shadow, because now you have lines intersecting, creating a bit of a lesser space. Just something basic to keep in mind if you guys are doing sketches and the like. If you don't want to basically try and go in and smudge everything or anything of the like, you can always just use hatching and cross-hatching to basically get yourselves a little bit of a shade without too much of a messy issue. Now let's actually take things a little bit far, and I'm going to use the bane of most artists on this one. I'm going to essentially outline and then sketch out a hand. So again, I'm going to start with the basic shapes. For me, I usually think of the palm of the hand as a square. Thumb, I can actually extrude outward as a small little part there, so essentially just taking out the piece of the hand, like the thumb, the distance between it is a small little triangle, specifically a right triangle with a 90-degree angle right there. And then I just start basically thinking of, okay, fingers are like this part here is like that, so okay, there's that one there, and then the pinky is like right here. If anything, guys, leave the questions for once I'm actually done explaining this, and then we can actually cover any of the questions you guys have towards the end of the actual lesson itself. So, save the questions for right now, and then we'll go from there. So, let's put here, you have this little square here for your palm. These little rectangles that I drew here are your fingers. And as you see, I'm basically just gesturing the hand right now, so the shapes aren't even exact, but you get the idea. Everything is broken down into little geometric shapes. So, now let's say I want to sketch out this little gesture study that I did here with the geometric shapes. So, I would go in, and I would essentially start looking at things a little bit more clearer. So I know that the fingers actually have multiple divisions, so that's one division there for the finger there. This one you don't really see much of the division except for there, so you just sketch the nail in. And looking at the reference for the hand, I would know that I have different things I can actually use here, such as a little webbing for the thumb, the actual thumb itself going out like this, coming back in, and then of course connecting to the wrist itself. And to kind of go over hatching one more time, which Black Hook, you actually bring up a very interesting thing. No, hatching isn't only just used in manga or anime. Hatching essentially is used in everything. Now, the thing about the cross-hatching is mainly just used to create different types of values, and hatching itself is just meant to create a lighter shade. So, to kind of bring that one in as a small little lesson, namely we will be covering cross-hatching, shading, and the like much later on in a lot more detailed fashion. But for now, essentially covering it very, very basically. Let's say the light source for this hand is right over here. So the light is essentially shining all around this. Now let's say I want to clean up my sketch first a little bit to get rid of some of the excess lines. Of course, when erasing, sometimes you will have to go back and redraw parts of the sketch that you actually did, either because you erased something by accident, or just because you didn't like it and you want to go over it again. Now let's say with that part there, let's say that's as much cleanup as you wanted to give it. Okay, and now you want to add the little bit of values. So, you would start, okay, the light is hitting them directly on this part here. So most of the shadows are going to be back here. So I'm going to start with my light shadows first, which is very much going to be where my hatch lines are. And again, this is a sketch, so if you go past your lines and anything of the sort, that's perfectly fine. This is again just you sketching, so it's mainly just you just bringing down a concept, not even worrying so much about the full refinement of it. Now, let's say you wanted to add more intense light, so the light is literally spotlight levels of huge, which means your shadows back here are going to be much more intense. So, instead of basically taking that, you would use the cross-hatching method, which essentially is just taking the lines you drew here and going against them. So you're just essentially crossing them out in very, very smaller areas to kind of intensify the shadow in that part. See? Now, taking a little bit of an extra considering into this, let's say you are essentially sketching out a person's face. So let's say you would start just basically, you draw the oval for the person's face, and you're just looking at them, so you're not even plotting anything down. So you're basically just drawing the person's face, you gesture them out, you see the eye there, the little thing, the eyebrow, the nose, the ridge, and all that such. And let's say you sketch the person out, they look decent for you, but you want to refine the sketch more, so you basically start adding more and more detail to the person's face, and you want to essentially just get the basic foundations down. Now here's a small little hint. Whenever you're actually drawing heads, also add the neck in there as well for at least some level of stability, and to kind of also give you a little bit of a concept of, okay, this head's actually attached to a body, which is somewhere in the vast void of the white space. But yes, so let's say you get this person's face down to this extent here. Again, this is not something you guys, if you guys are starting out, will be able to do really, really fast. It's a little bit unfair for me to be actually drawing it this quickly. Again, I've been drawing since I was 2. I am almost 30, so there's that to take into consideration. I've been drawing for 28 years of my life. So, again, and this is a concept that I will always bring forth, and that's practice makes perfect. So let's say you're going to sketch out this little face a little bit more, make it a little bit more refined and everything all together. So most people tend to start with the eyes. Honestly, I would dare say don't focus so much on the eyes and instead spread the focus across the entire face. So for me, I would start focusing with around the actual general shape of the face. So let's say the person has a very defined cheekbone, and a very sharp jaw. I would then move on to the lips. Person have very narrow lips, go to the nose, which I'll say this person had a very wide nose. Start building up the ridge, go into the eyebrow. She's actually had nice little neat eyebrows. And then I could add the eyes in. And again, you notice that I'm not spending too much time on these. I'm essentially just outlining and then keep moving. And again, that's because this is not supposed to be some detailed, full-on thing. I'm just going through and adding lines because I'm not even focusing on getting this thing grammatically correct. Again, just sketching and getting things done ready. Person's hair, not enough to be even super neat, just enough to basically get the detail. And I have my semi-loose sketch of what the person is. Now, if I were to go back into this, again, I would know that there's a lot of errors with this. The eyes are too far apart, the nose is far, like the lower lip, like the upper lip as compared to the actual nose itself is very, very long. So this guy's got a very dropped lip. There's a lot of things wrong with this, but again, this is just a sketch. So I would say, let's say you're gonna now, you want to add some shading and the like to your little sketch here. Again, I would go in, start doing a little cleanup, get rid of some excess lines, add a little bit extra excess lines if in case I want to add more things later. Oh, let's say I want to actually fix the fact that the nose and mouth are a little too far apart, so I would move the lip up a little, fix the jaw a little bit, fix the mouth a little. Add a little bit extra to the nostril here, actually correct the distance here of that nose. And let's say that's all I want to do with the actual cleanup that I'm doing. Now I wanted to shade with the hashing, so again, take my light source. This time I already know that the light source is coming from over here, so I'm essentially just adding in the lines to help shape and value the contour of the sketch. You see? Something very easy, something very simple for most, not for all. I'm not going to say it's super easy because, admittedly, it does take a lot of practice. But sketching, in a sense, is basically meant to help you kind of start your process of refining. And much like something that even Speedy here just actually mentioned, and it's something that I will be covering later on, and that is the fact that sometimes, yes, I do make it look easy. But again, I've been drawing for 28 years old. Like, I'm 29 right now, I'm going to be 30 next year, so literally I've been drawing for roughly about 28 years now. So for me, some of the things are simple. And in truth, after some practice, it'll become easy for you guys as well. It'll become simple, it'll become easy, and sometimes it'll just become mundane, and you'd want to try new things and try harder things, and that's actually what art is. It's an ever-growing and ever-evolving concept. So, to kind of bring everything that I've just mentioned right now together, it's the fact of using your observations, using the geometric shapes, and then looking at what you're seeing here, and then just slowly just add in details as you so wish via your eyesight to try and bring forth the first part of a sketch. Name you, it doesn't have to be as refined as what I drew here. It can actually sometimes be as messy as you're drawing a person. Let's say you're just trying to draw a person... I don't know. Let's not even say you're trying to draw a person. Let's just say you're trying to draw a basketball. So you would draw the shape of the ball, which is, of course, a circle. Add in the lines here. Let's say, actually, not even basketball. Let's say it's the baseball. So you draw in the lines, you go in like this to basically start adding in. And then you kind of want to, like, oh, I'm going to sketch it out a little bit more. So you darken in the lines a little bit more. Like that, and then just add in the little things here like this. For a baseball. And then add a little bit of hash lines here to basically think, is like, okay, the shading is going to be right here. And then you just draw something like that, and this would be considered your sketch. It can be as simple as messy as that, it can be as detailed or as clean as this, it can actually be as far as you want to actually go. And in truth, that's why sketching is as extensive as it is. So you can actually be very, very picky with your sketches and just try and make everything super clean. But in truth, at the start, don't go super detailed with your sketches. It's not recommended. Be a little bit messy, be a little unorganized. And then, once you get the concept of how to do the sketches first, then go forth and try and refine it further. With that said, this concludes today's lessons. So, I'm going to first state that I will be uploading these things to YouTube again, like I mentioned much in the earlier one. I will be linking my YouTube account, as well as my Patreon, my Twitter, and potentially some other art sites that I belong to, so you guys can either contact me in those sites or wherever you feel like doing. And much like I did last time, though, I will be assigning a What If homework. Now, the reason why I'm calling it now the What If homework is because it's not mandatory. I don't require you guys to do it or not. This is just something, if you guys want to actually go for it and practice, then by all means do so. For this week's homework, I actually want to see if you guys can actually find either a picture on the internet, it could be anything, a scenery, a bird, it could be even a photo of you. Look at that picture and break it down into basic geometric shapes. That's all it is. Break it down into geometric shapes. Add a little bit of hashing to basically create a little bit of shadow. If you feel comfortable using shadows or blending, then do that. But just create the basic shapes of the image and then add a little bit of shadow. I want to see what you guys can do with that. Next time we'll be covering a lot more concepts, essentially bringing in a lot more into the concept of refining, as well as positionings for the head and different parts of the body, and also different things with the environment. So, till next time, guys, I will see you all again in the next lesson. Take care, and keep drawing.